You freeze for just a second because you hear something outside your house that doesn't sound right. That tiny pause is older than farming, older than language, and possibly older than your own species. It happens before you think, before you decide whether you're scared, before your brain even knows what it heard. One strange sound, a heavy footstep, a branch snapping, a growl that's just low enough to make your stomach tighten. Your body reacts first. Your heart speeds up, your muscles tense, your breathing changes. Only afterward does your conscious mind ask the question, what was that? You probably think that's just anxiety, maybe stress, maybe your imagination, but it isn't. It's one of the oldest survival systems your ancestors ever developed. Long before humans built cities, long before we farmed crops, long before anyone carved words into stone, your ancestors lived in a world where seeing danger was already too late. They survived because they recognized terrifying sounds. And one particular sound became so important that evolution burned the reaction into the human brain itself. Even today, millions of years later, your body still hasn't forgotten it. The strange part? We don't even know exactly when this instinct began. And that's the mystery. How far back do we have to travel before we find the first human, or something close enough to call our ancestor, who stopped breathing because they heard that sound? The answer takes us far beyond civilization, far beyond the Ice Age, past the first humans, past the first tools, into a world so ancient that our ancestors didn't even look human yet. And somehow, they're still living inside your nervous system. Imagine the forests of Earth around 55 million years ago. No roads, no houses, no campfires, just endless trees stretching across a warm planet filled with predators hiding above, below, and all around. Our ancestors weren't hunters. They weren't strong. They weren't fast. They weren't even at the top of the food chain. They were tiny primates, about the size of squirrels. Everything wanted to eat them. Massive snakes, ancient birds of prey, early meat-eating mammals. Death didn't announce itself with dramatic music. It arrived almost silently. That's why hearing became everything. Modern research into early primate evolution suggests that many of our ancestors developed remarkable sensitivity to sudden, unusual sounds while living in dense forests where visibility was almost useless. Think about that for a second. If you're surrounded by leaves, vines, and thick branches, you can't see 20 meters ahead, but sound travels. A rustle in the canopy, leaves falling when there isn't any wind, a branch bending under unexpected weight. Those tiny clues often gave you only one chance: run now, or become lunch. The popular image of evolution is always the same: bigger brains, standing upright, making tools. But before any of that mattered, there was listening. Because intelligence is useless if you're already dead. And here's what's incredible. Natural selection didn't reward the primates who correctly identified every sound. It rewarded the ones who reacted immediately, even if they were wrong half the time. Jumping at a harmless noise wastes a little energy. Ignoring a predator ends your bloodline forever. Evolution doesn't optimize for comfort. It optimizes for survival. That's why your body still startles when something crashes in the middle of the night. Your ancestors passed that reaction to you because the cautious ones lived long enough to have children. The fearless ones usually became fossils. Think about your own life. Have you ever been completely alone in your house, heard a single unexplained sound, and instantly stopped moving? You didn't calculate probabilities. You didn't perform a risk assessment. Your body made the decision before your mind even joined the conversation. That isn't irrational. It's ancient. And the deeper scientists look into how the brain processes threatening sounds, the stranger this story becomes. Because your ears aren't really the first line of defense. Your brain is, and parts of it react so quickly that conscious thought actually arrives late. We'll come back to that near the end, because once you understand it, you'll never hear an unfamiliar noise the same way again. If you're enjoying uncovering these forgotten truths, subscribe, because the next discovery completely changed what scientists believed about how early humans survived. And it begins with a set of footprints frozen in volcanic ash for over 3.6 million years. Those footprints reveal something almost nobody expects. They don't show fearless hunters. They show vulnerable creatures walking through a landscape where every sound could mean death. And one sound, above all others, would shape the future of our species. The footprints begin at a volcano, not because anyone planned it, because disaster accidentally preserved one ordinary walk for more than 3.6 million years. In northern Tanzania lies a place called Laetoli. In 1976, paleontologist Mary Leakey and her team uncovered something extraordinary. A blanket of volcanic ash had hardened after an eruption, capturing a trail of footprints left by our distant ancestors before rain sealed them forever. They're some of the oldest known footprints ever found, and they tell a story that bones never could. The popular image is always the same. Our ancestors confidently marching across open African grasslands, slowly becoming masters of the world. But those footprints suggest something very different: vulnerability. Every step happened in a landscape filled with lions, giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats, crocodiles, and predators we've never even seen alive. Out there, the grass wasn't beautiful. It was terrifying. Because grass hides movement, and hidden movement makes sound before it makes shapes. Imagine standing in grass taller than your shoulders. You hear something moving. You don't know if it's the wind, a grazing antelope, or a lion creeping closer. You don't wait to find out. Your ancestors couldn't afford curiosity. They survived because uncertainty itself became a warning. Think about that. Today, we hate uncertainty because it makes us anxious. Back then, anxiety kept you alive. Your nervous system wasn't broken. It was perfectly calibrated for a world that wanted to eat you. Now, here's what makes those footprints even more remarkable. Some researchers believe they were made by multiple individuals traveling together. Why? Because surviving alone was becoming almost impossible. Another pair of ears, another set of eyes, another heartbeat ready to panic before yours did. Groups didn't just share food, they shared awareness. If one person heard something, everyone froze. Fear became contagious long before language existed. And honestly, that's still how humans work. One person suddenly looks terrified on a crowded street, and 20 strangers immediately turn around. No discussion, no vote, just instant attention. Your brain still assumes someone else may have heard danger before you did. Millions of years later, you're still borrowing survival from the crowd. But here's the thing nobody tells you. The most terrifying sound wasn't always the loudest. A roar is dramatic. Movies love roars. Real predators usually don't. Lions stalk almost silently. Leopards move through grass without making a sound. Snakes don't roar at all. Sometimes the most dangerous sound was almost nothing. One branch bending. One bird suddenly taking flight. One group of monkeys screaming from somewhere you couldn't see. Or even worse, everything becoming silent. Silence. That may have been the sound your ancestors feared most. Because forests are noisy. Birds sing, insects buzz, monkeys call to one another. Life is loud until a predator arrives. Modern wildlife researchers still observe this today. Entire forests can suddenly fall quiet moments before an apex predator moves through the area. Imagine hearing that. Thousands of tiny voices disappearing all at once. No explanation, just absence. Your ancestors didn't need to understand ecology. They only needed to recognize the pattern. Noise, silence, run. Let that sink in. The terrifying sound wasn't necessarily a growl. Sometimes it was the disappearance of every other sound. Now, here's where this story becomes even stranger. Around 2 million years ago, a new kind of human ancestor began spreading across Africa, Homo erectus. The fossils found at Kubifora in Kenya show a species that looked far more familiar than anything before. Longer legs, larger brains, better endurance. Many people assume this was when humans finally became dominant. But archaeology tells a completely different story. They still didn't own the night. The sun set, and the world belonged to predators. Lions, hyenas, leopards, gigantic crocodiles waiting beside rivers. Even if Homo erectus had crude stone tools, stone doesn't help much when you can't see what's hunting you. Nightfall wasn't bedtime. It was a countdown. Researchers studying predator behavior estimate that ancient Africa held far more large carnivores than the continent does today. Imagine stepping outside after dark, knowing the odds of encountering something that could kill you were many times higher than they are now. No flashlight, no walls, no locked doors, just darkness and sound. A twig snapping behind you. Heavy breathing somewhere beyond the trees. Hyenas laughing in the distance. People often think the hyena's famous laugh sounds almost funny. It doesn't. Not when you're cold, hungry, holding a sleeping child, and realizing those calls are getting closer. Respectfully, no horror movie has ever produced a soundtrack more convincing than The African Night 2 million years ago. This is why hearing became humanity's early warning system. Not because our ears were extraordinary, but because our lives depended on interpreting tiny acoustic clues before our eyes could confirm anything. And yet, everything was about to change. Because somewhere, hundreds of thousands of years later, humans would discover something that didn't just give them warmth. It transformed the very sounds of the night itself. For millions of years, sunset meant surrender. It didn't matter how intelligent you were. It didn't matter how strong your group had become. When darkness arrived, humans lost their greatest advantage: their eyes. The predators didn't. Lions could see, leopards could climb, hyenas could smell blood from astonishing distances. Humans? They listened. Every rustle, every distant call, every unexplained silence. Night wasn't empty. It was an invisible battlefield. Then, sometime around 790,000 years ago, something happened that quietly changed the relationship between humans and fear forever. The evidence comes from a site in northern Israel called Gesher Benot Yaakov. Archaeologists uncovered clusters of burned wood, charred seeds, and stone tools scattered in patterns that strongly suggest the repeated, controlled use of fire. People often think fire's greatest gift was warmth, or cooking, or keeping people comfortable. Those were incredible benefits, but they weren't the first thing that changed. The biggest transformation was something you couldn't see. It was something you could hear. Think about sitting beside a campfire. The flames crackle, wood pops, the people around you speak softly. The fire throws light into the darkness while masking the tiny noises your own group makes. But beyond that circle, the forest is still listening. Here's the reversal. Humans didn't just bring fire into the night. They forced the night to reveal itself. Predators that once moved silently now had to cross patches of light. Animals avoided the flames. Some circled farther away. Others announced themselves before getting close. The soundscape changed. For the first time in millions of years, humans weren't simply reacting to terrifying sounds. They were shaping them. Now, here's what makes that finding so important. Fire didn't eliminate fear. It gave fear distance. Instead of hearing a twig snap 2 meters away, you might hear it 20 meters away. That tiny difference could mean the difference between waking your group or becoming the reason nobody slept again. Imagine what that felt like. Generation after generation had known only darkness. Then suddenly, night had edges, a boundary, a place where families could gather without staring into complete blackness. The fire became more than heat. It became psychological safety. And something fascinating happens when people finally feel safe. They start telling stories. Anthropologists have long suggested that evenings around controlled fire created entirely new opportunities for conversation, memory, and teaching. Not because humans suddenly became more creative, because they finally had enough security to think about something besides surviving the next 10 seconds. It's almost funny when you realize it. Your favorite late-night conversations, those deep talks around a bonfire, they're probably echoes of evenings that began hundreds of thousands of years ago. The setting changed. The instinct didn't. But don't mistake comfort for victory. The predators never disappeared. They simply waited beyond the light, and humans still had one enormous weakness: their own minds. Because the greatest danger wasn't always outside the firelight. Sometimes it was inside the human brain itself. Fast forward to around 300,000 years ago, a place called Jebel Irhoud in present-day Morocco. When researchers uncovered fossils there, they pushed the origins of Homo sapiens back much earlier than many scientists had expected. These weren't modern people living modern lives, but they carried something that would become humanity's greatest survival tool: a brain unlike any before it. The popular belief is that evolution mainly made humans smarter, but intelligence wasn't the biggest breakthrough. Prediction was. Your brain stopped reacting only to danger. It started anticipating danger. Imagine hearing a distant growl once. You survive. The next evening, the same sound appears again. Before the predator even gets close, your heart begins racing. Not because you're weak, because your brain has connected sound with memory. This changed everything. Fear became portable. You no longer needed the predator to be present. The possibility was enough. Think about that for a second. Every horror movie you've ever watched, every jump when your phone rings unexpectedly, every moment you've mistaken a coat hanging in the dark for a person, they're all built on this ancient upgrade. Your brain would rather create 10 false alarms than miss one real threat. Evolution never rewarded perfect accuracy. It rewarded survivors. Now, here's where everything you assumed gets turned upside down. People often believe fear is the opposite of intelligence, as if courage means ignoring it. But for most of human history, fear was intelligence. The people who dismissed strange sounds didn't become heroes. They disappeared. The people who woke everyone because they thought they heard something passed their genes to the next generation. In other words, your anxiety may not be a design flaw. It's an ancient survival feature operating in a world that no longer resembles the one it evolved for. That's the biggest reversal of this entire story. You aren't carrying a Stone Age brain inside a modern body. You're carrying millions of years of successful survival decisions. Some are just trying to solve problems that barely exist anymore. Or do they? Because there's one piece of evidence hidden deep inside a cave in southern France that suggests ancient humans never truly escaped the sounds they feared most. Instead, they painted them. Around 36,000 years ago, someone walked deep into a cave in what is now southern France. Not to hide, not to sleep, not even to escape the weather. They carried a flickering torch into complete darkness for one reason: to leave a message. Today, we call it Chauvet Cave. When archaeologists first entered it in 1994, they found hundreds of astonishing paintings preserved behind a rockfall for tens of thousands of years. Lions, hyenas, woolly rhinoceroses, bears, mammoths. The artwork is breathtaking, but what it doesn't show is just as revealing. There are almost no landscapes, very few plants, almost no peaceful moments. Instead, the walls are dominated by animals capable of killing humans. The popular explanation is simple. Ancient people painted the animals they hunted, but Chauvet doesn't fit that story. Many of the creatures painted there weren't common prey at all. They were predators, animals humans desperately tried to avoid. So why fill an entire cave with them? The honest answer is, we don't know, and we probably never will. But here's what makes the mystery so fascinating. Imagine spending your entire life hearing lions before you saw them, hearing hyenas outside the firelight, listening to bears moving through forests. Those sounds would become part of your identity, your childhood, your nightmares, your stories. If you wanted to explain danger to the next generation, would you begin with words or pictures? Think about a parent today teaching a child not to touch a hot stove. You don't wait until they burn themselves. You warn them first. Those cave paintings may have served a similar purpose, not simply recording animals, but recording fear itself. A visual memory of the sounds every child would eventually recognize. Now, here's where it gets extraordinary. Researchers studying the acoustics inside Chauvet Cave discovered something unexpected. Many of the largest animal paintings appear in chambers with unusual echoes and resonance, places where sounds bounce from the walls in powerful ways. Some archaeologists have suggested this wasn't an accident. Imagine standing in darkness while torchlight dances across the walls. Someone imitates the deep rumble of a lion. The cave throws the sound back at you. For a moment, it feels alive. Whether that interpretation is completely correct is still debated. But one thing isn't. Ancient humans cared deeply about sound, not just hearing it, experiencing it, remembering it, passing it on. Because forgetting dangerous sounds had consequences, permanent ones. By the end of the Ice Age, around 12,000 years ago, humans were changing the planet. They hunted with incredible coordination, built permanent settlements, created agriculture, domesticated animals. Civilizations were beginning to emerge. The world was becoming safer, at least compared to everything that came before. But evolution doesn't erase millions of years overnight. Your brain doesn't receive an update simply because predators become less common. It keeps the old software running. Modern neuroscience reveals something remarkable. When you hear an unexpected, threatening sound, signals can travel along what's often called the brain's low road. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux helped show that some emotional responses can begin before your conscious brain has fully identified what you're hearing. Think about that. Your body isn't waiting for permission. It's buying time. A fraction of a second may not sound important today, but for your ancestors, that tiny advantage could separate the people who escaped from the people who became evidence. Here's a simple experiment. Imagine you're walking through your house late at night. Everything is quiet. Then, a loud crash comes from another room. Your shoulders tense instantly. Your heartbeat jumps. Maybe you even stop breathing for a moment. Only afterward do you discover the cat knocked something over, or the wind pushed a door shut. People laugh at themselves in moments like these. I scared myself for nothing. But evolution doesn't see it that way. From evolution's perspective, congratulations, the safety system worked perfectly. A false alarm costs almost nothing. Ignoring a real threat can cost everything. That's why your brain is biased toward caution. It always has been, and after millions of years, it still is. But this leaves us with one final question. If your nervous system is carrying survival lessons from forests, savannas, caves, and campfires, then what was the sound? The one terrifying cue that ancient humans almost universally understood. The sound that echoes through nearly every stage of our story. The answer isn't what most people expect. And once you hear it, you'll understand why your body still reacts to it today. So, what was the terrifying sound every ancient human recognized? It wasn't a lion's roar. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It wasn't a bear growling outside the cave. Those sounds mattered, but they came too late. By the time you heard the roar, the predator already knew where you were. The sound that shaped humanity wasn't one specific animal. It was something much older, much simpler, much more terrifying. It was the sound that didn't belong. The unexpected sound, the pattern breaking, the noise that appeared where there should have been none, or the silence where there should have been life. Think back through everything we've discovered. 55 million years ago, tiny primates survived because they noticed movements hidden inside dense forests before they ever saw what caused them. At Laetoli, footsteps crossed open grasslands where a single rustle could hide a lion only meters away. Homo erectus listened through endless African nights, where every snapping branch demanded a decision. Fire gave humans light, but more importantly, it gave them the chance to hear danger before danger reached them. Early Homo sapiens developed brains that remembered threatening sounds long after the danger had passed. And inside Chauvet Cave, people carried those memories into the darkness, preserving the animals whose sounds had haunted generations. The entire story points toward one conclusion. Your ancestors weren't listening for a particular sound. They were listening for anything that broke the pattern. Because nature has patterns. Birds sing, insects buzz, leaves move with the wind, streams keep flowing. When one part suddenly changes, something changed the environment first. Sometimes it was harmless. Sometimes it had teeth. Now, here's what's incredible. Modern neuroscience says your brain still works exactly the same way. When an unexpected sound reaches your ears, the conscious part of your brain doesn't get first choice. The emotional systems react almost immediately. Your muscles tighten, your pupils widen, your heart accelerates. Only afterward does your thinking brain begin asking questions. What was that? Where did it come from? Am I actually in danger? Think about how often this happens. You're driving home. Someone suddenly honks right beside you. Your entire body jumps before you even identify the car. You're asleep. A glass falls somewhere downstairs. You're sitting in a cafe. Someone unexpectedly shouts your name. You're hiking. Every bird around you suddenly takes off at once. Different sounds, same reaction. Because your nervous system isn't analyzing the sound itself, it's detecting broken expectations. The world behaved one way, then suddenly it didn't. That instinct has survived because it kept working for millions of years. Here's the irony. Many people spend their lives trying to eliminate fear completely, as if fear itself is the enemy. But your ancestors would have seen things differently. Fear wasn't weakness. Fear was information. The question was never, am I afraid? The question was, why? Sometimes the answer was nothing. Sometimes it was the wind. Sometimes it was another member of your group. But every once in a while, it was exactly what fear had been warning you about. Evolution doesn't care how calm you look. It cares whether you're still alive tomorrow. That's why your body still chooses caution. Not because it's pessimistic, because caution built your family tree. Every generation that ignored the strange sound ended its own story. Every generation that paused, looked, listened, and lived passed that instinct forward, eventually to you. Which brings us back to where we started. Tonight, you'll probably hear something unexpected. A floorboard settling, a branch tapping against a window, a noise from another room. For just a fraction of a second, you'll freeze. Not because you're irrational, not because you're anxious, because somewhere inside your nervous system lives an ancient survivor who spent millions of years learning one unforgettable lesson. When the pattern changes, pay attention. That tiny pause before you move, that moment when your heartbeat gets louder than the room around you, isn't a glitch. It's one of the oldest pieces of your humanity. Older than farming, older than language, older than civilization, perhaps even older than your own species. Every time an unfamiliar sound makes you stop and listen, you're continuing a survival ritual that began millions of years before anyone could call themselves human. And that's why the most ancient sound wasn't the predator. It was the moment the world no longer sounded safe.